The village still stood, but it didn't breathe. Fires burned, yes. Children laughed again, but the ground beneath it all was listening. Ragnar felt it most, not as sound, not as movement, as weight. A pressure beneath his ribs, as if something old had curled around the bones and was waiting for its cue to squeeze. He said nothing, but he stopped sleeping. Floki knew too. He scratched the dirt with sticks. He followed ants. He whispered to roots that never answered, but sometimes they twitched. He grinned each time. I don't think it's dead, he told the well. It didn't answer. That was enough. Halvard rebuilt the northern fence. Even though nothing had come from that side. Even though the trees looked thinner there, he drove the posts deeper than needed, lined the base with bones. Let it taste what it missed, he said. No one argued. They just kept their distance. The boy was drawing again. Not mouths, not doors, now cracks, long ones, with shapes falling through. He never looked at what he made, he just kept moving his hands. Ragnar once asked what he was drawing. The boy said, the floor, then added, before it forgets us. That night, the earth moaned, only once, enough to rattle bowls, to silence goats, to wake the oldest woman, who hadn't spoken in months. She opened her eyes, sat up, whispered, it's begun again, then laid back down, and never rose. Athelstan came to Ragnar before dawn. He looked older, his robe was stained. His voice steady. I dreamt of the fire again, he said. Which one? Ragnar asked. The one that hasn't burned yet. Ragnar nodded. No questions, only truth. They walked to the mouth of the old crack, the one from before. It had been covered in planks, stomped flat, forgotten by all but a few. Now, it was open again, wider, clean. Breathing. Inside, only black, and a smell, not rot, not memory. Death. The kind of scent that lives in places your ancestors never dared speak of. Ragnar stared down. I don't think it wants to kill us. Athelstan frowned. Then what? Ragnar didn't blink. I think it wants to keep us. They left no guards, no torches, only stones. Set in a pattern Ragnar didn't explain. Before he turned away, he looked down once more and said softly, not yet. The earth didn't reply, but it pulsed. Once, enough to shift the dirt, just enough to feel like breath. The crack didn't widen, but it didn't close either. It simply stayed, like a mouth trying not to smile. The villagers stopped walking near it. Even the brave ones, not out of fear, out of memory, and memory. Was louder now. Floki began speaking in circles, not nonsense. Just truth said sideways. He sat outside the barn and told the wind. The ground is a throat and we built a home inside it. No one interrupted. Because no one could prove him wrong. The boy's drawings grew stranger. No longer shapes, now faces. But none of them looked human. They had no eyes, only names scrawled above them. Names no one remembered giving. Ragnar burned one of the drawings. The boy only smiled. That won't stop them. Ira kept her blade sharp, but she hadn't fought in days. She trained in silence every morning. Same pattern, same stance, like ritual, like she was carving muscle into memory, or preparing it for something that would erase her. Athelstan gathered the villagers, not to preach, to ask, what do you see when you sleep? They answered one by one, water with no sky. A stare that went both up and down. A child whispering backwards. A voice made of wood. No one laughed, not even Floki. Ragnar stayed near the tree line, watching the woods, listening for something that wasn't footsteps. The trees had begun to lean slightly, not toward the village, but toward the crack, like they too were remembering something they'd sworn to forget. Halvard came to him that night, blood on his hands, not from battle. From digging. He'd gone into the far field. The earth was soft, too soft. Beneath the roots he found bone, long, clean, stacked, in rows. He said, I think we're living on something that died a long time ago. Ragnar replied, then we should be careful how loud we walk. At sunrise, The wind returned. It moved strange, not over the land under it. The grass didn't bend. The dirt did, shivering in places where no feet stood. Floki pressed his ear to the ground. After a moment, he stood. They're closer. Who? Era asked. He grinned. The ones we forgot to forget. That evening, the boy walked to the crack. No one followed. No one stopped him. He sat beside it, said nothing. But from far away, Ragnar watched and saw dust rise around him in a perfect circle. As if the air was choosing not to enter. As if the ground was breathing in. Only in one spot. Only around him. Ragnar approached just before dark. The boy didn't look up. He only whispered, "They know my name now. Do you know theirs?" The boy shook his head. "No. But I'll dream them soon." He smiled, like it was a gift, or a curse he'd grown fond of. That night, every fire flickered once at the same time, then steadied. No wind. No shift, only rhythm, like the ground had taken a breath and was about to speak. The firewood burned faster now, not hotter, faster. Like the flame was hungry for something deeper than heat. Athelstan noticed it first, then Floki. By dusk, they all felt it. Even the children stopped throwing twigs into the flames. The sparks didn't rise anymore, they sank, like gravity had changed its mind. Ragnar walked the village twice that night. Once before the stars came, once after. He saw the same thing both times, smoke that wouldn't drift. Roots pressing up through the floorboards, silence around the well, and in the distance, a low hum, faint, rhythmic, not sound, not wind, a warning that didn't need to raise its voice. Halvard sharpened spears. Longer than needed, balanced for throwing. He didn't say who they were for, but he carved 3 notches into each shaft. One for the village, one for the mountain, one for the name no one had spoken since the last fog. The boy didn't eat that day, he drank water, sat in the ashes near the goat pen, and hummed, not a song. A pulse, low, repeating. Ragnar asked him, "Why that sound?" The boy looked up. "It's how they find us." Ira broke formation during training, dropped her blade. Not from exhaustion, from weight. The air had thickened. The dirt beneath her boots had pushed upward. As if the land no longer wanted her standing. She cursed, kicked the soil, and whispered, "Not yet." The ground didn't answer, but her sword had dulled. Only hers. Athelstan gathered feathers, crow, owl, sparrow. He stitched them into a circle, hung it from the old tree near the chapel ruins. When Ragnar saw it, he asked, "Is it for protection?" "No," Athelstan said. "It's for direction. North, memory." That night the crack glowed, not with fire, with reminder. A faint light pulsed from within it. Blue, pale, almost like breath under skin. Floki sat beside it, cross-legged. He whispered, "If it opens, I'll follow." Ragnar crouched behind him. "You'll fall." Floki smiled. "Is there a difference?" They tied ropes to nearby trees, fastened ladders, lit torches, for the first time since it opened. They looked in, and what they saw wasn't dirt, wasn't stone, it was structure. Angled, layered, built, walls that twisted, symbols too deep to have been carved. Something beneath them had form, and worse, intention. Era touched her blade to the edge. It hissed. No fire, no spark, just resistance. She pulled back fast and said, "It knows we're watching." The next morning, the village woke to ash on their roofs, not from fire, from inside the well. It had bubbled up, left prints on the stone rim. 4 fingers, no thumb, small, and wet. The boy didn't speak that day, only pointed, to the crack, to the sky, to Ragnar's chest, and when Ragnar finally asked what he meant, the boy whispered, "Something's waking up, and it remembers your name first." By the 4th night, the crack no longer looked like a wound. It looked like an invitation, edges clean, walls dry, no scent, just space. And pull. The boy stood beside it longer now. Didn't speak. Didn't eat. He hummed that same low note, like a lullaby for something that didn't sleep. Athelstan warned him, "Don't give it rhythm. The boy smiled. It already has one. I'm just remembering it. Era moved her cot into the forge. Not for warmth. Not for tools. For stone. She said stone didn't shift under her at night. Wood creaked, soil pulsed, but stone. It only waited. Ragnar asked her if she was afraid. She answered, "Of what it'll do when it calls back." Floki made a torch from cloth soaked in wine and river ash. He named it Throatlight. When asked why, he said because if I drop it, we'll know how far it screams. Ragnar hadn't slept since the glow. Not really. He closed his eyes, yes, but dreams had stopped being his. Now, they borrowed him. Each time he drifted, he saw the same image. A room beneath roots, walls made of teeth, a voice that didn't echo, but vibrated. He didn't tell anyone, because he feared they were dreaming it too. And if they all dreamed the same thing, maybe it was real. They made a plan that night to descend, not deep, not far. Just enough to mark the shape of the place, to see if the dark had walls, or memory. Halvard led the discussion. Floki mapped the descent. Athelstan blessed a rope. Ragnar stood silent until the end, then said, "If it takes someone, we don't pull them back, not unless they ask." No one argued, no one smiled. At dawn they prepared. 3 would go, Floki, Era, and the boy. He insisted. Ragnar wanted to say no. But something in the boy's stare said he'd already been there once. Maybe in sleep, maybe in memory, but he knew more than any map. And sometimes, the key to a lock is the sound it hates the most. They tied ropes to the strongest trees. The wind was still. The crack glowed faintly. The soil felt hollow. One by one they lowered. First Floki grinning, then Era steady, then the boy humming. Ragnar watched. Every second, every meter, until the rope stilled. Then, he waited. Athelstan stood beside him, eyes closed. He was listening, not for sound. For shift, the kind that comes before things break. Inside, the dark was clean. It didn't stick, it flowed. The walls pulsed faintly, symbols curved around the interior, not drawn. "Born," Floki whispered. "This place isn't made, it's remembered." Era touched her sword to the floor. It warmed. And the boy reached for the nearest wall and whispered back, "You forgot me first." The wall shivered. They didn't speak for the first few minutes underground. Not because of fear, because of respect for the shape of the dark, for the memory of walls that pulsed like lungs. The boy walked first, not fast, not slow. As if retracing steps no one else had taken yet. The symbols on the walls curved slightly as he passed, not changed, reacted. Floki kept a finger on the rope at all times, not to climb. To feel if anything else touched it. When it trembled once, he whispered, "We're not alone." Era didn't draw her sword. She just moved her hand closer to it. Ready? But not for battle, for recognition. The chamber opened into a wider space. Oval, quiet, perfectly smooth. At the center, a mound, low, round, not made of dirt. Of bone, stacked, arranged, too clean for accident, too sacred for use. Floki crouched beside it. "It's not a grave." Era circled it once. "No. It's a message." The boy didn't move. He stared at the ceiling. A dome, uncarved, until light moved across it. Not sunlight, memory light, a flicker, a shape, faint outlines of names, in a language none of them had learned, but all somehow understood. Era whispered one of them aloud, and the wall flinched. Floki grinned. "It doesn't like being remembered." Ragnar's voice came down the rope, not loud. "What do you see?" the boy responded. "A place that isn't waiting anymore." Athelstan pulled Ragnar aside. "We need to prepare, not for what they bring, but for what we brought back." Ragnar didn't answer, because deep in his chest, something stirred. Not pain, not fear, memory, and it didn't belong to him. Below, the boy placed his palm on the floor. It was warm, but not heat. "More like breath," he whispered. "Do you still know me?" And from somewhere inside the stone came the faintest sound, a click, soft, rhythmic, like a lock that had waited too long to remember how to turn. Floki stood quickly. Era stepped back. The mound at the center began to fall in, not collapse, open, and from within. Air, old, heavy, smelling of roots, salt, and something else, something wet, something waiting. The boy looked up, eyes wide, face calm, and said, "It's not alone anymore." The mound didn't crumble, it peeled, bone by bone, layer by layer. Each piece shifting aside without sound, no dust, no rot. Only space being made where it had once been sealed. Inside. Not a body, not a god, a shape. Tall, narrow, wrapped in what looked like roots, but breathed like skin. The boy stepped closer. His hand didn't shake. He tilted his head and said, "It remembers warmth." Ira gripped her sword, not to strike, to steady herself. Her breath had shortened, not from fear, from recognition. "I saw this," she whispered, "in the mirror." Floki didn't respond. Had already knelt, not in worship, in study, above. Ragnar felt the rope shift once, then again, a steady pull, not distress, but intent. "They found something," he said. Athelstan asked, "Do we pull them back?" "No," Ragnar replied. "If they needed us, we'd already be hearing screams." Inside, the chamber changed. Subtle, temperature, sound, light. The lines on the walls thickened. Symbols grew teeth. The ceiling shimmered like remembering a shape it once forgot. And from beneath the bones, the shape began to breathe. Not fast. Slow, measured, like it had been waiting for lungs to find it again. The boy stepped closer. The root skin pulsed once, then opened. Just a slit. Just enough. Inside nothing. No organs, no blood, just a mirror. Flat, round, alive. It didn't reflect him. It reflected them, all three. Floki, Era, the boy, but twisted. Floki was smiling with no eyes. Era held a sword made of birds. And the boy. The boy wasn't there. Only a mark, a circle of ash. Era stepped back. "That's not us," the boy replied. "No, it's what the place remembers about us." Floki stood, looked straight into it, then let it remember this. He threw the torch. It didn't burn. It froze, midair, spinning, then cracked and fell to ash. The chamber pulsed again. This time, the bones around the edge shifted, and a voice, not spoken, felt, "Do not feed what cannot forget." The boy's knees buckled. Floki caught him, but the words kept coming, into them. Not from the shape, from the stone itself. Names are not yours to carry. Memory is not yours to light. You woke the weight. And then, silence. No collapse, no scream, just a slow turning of the air. And the sound of the stone mirror, cracking, but not shattering. Changing. The reflection vanished, replaced by something else. A door. Ragnar heard the shift above. He looked at Athelstan. "They're not coming up." Athelstan whispered, "They don't need to." Because whatever the YD gone down to find was already on its way up. The door didn't swing, didn't slide, didn't open. It revealed. Like stone remembering how to separate, and beyond it, light. But not firelight, not sun, a color no one had words for. Not gold, not gray, something between memory and silence. Floki stepped toward it first. He didn't ask, didn't gesture, he just moved. And the boy followed, not curious, not afraid, drawn. Like a question walking toward its own answer. Era hesitated, her hand on her sword. Then, she stepped in too. Because the only thing worse than going into the unknown was leaving others alone in it. Behind them, the chamber folded, not collapsed. Folded, like pages turning away from a story that no longer needed to be read. And the walls, they stopped pulsing. Because the rhythm had moved on. The tunnel beyond was smooth, long, no turns. No steps, just descent. Gentle. The boy whispered, "It's not going deeper. It's going closer." Ira frowned. To what? He didn't answer, but Floki did. to us. Meanwhile, above, Ragnar felt the rope slacken. Too much. He tugged. It gave. Too easy. He and Halvard pulled fast. What came back was the rope, but not tied. Not knotted, just placed. Still warm, still wet. Athelstan touched it, and his breath hitched. "They're not below anymore," he said. Ragnar nodded. There through, the tunnel ended, abrupt. Into a chamber that didn't feel like a room, but a pulse, round, breathing, at the center, a throne, but not one to sit on, one to become. Roots curled into its base. Ash lay in perfect circles, no dust, only intent. The boy stepped toward it, then paused. Floki whispered, "This feels like choosing something that already happened." The boy placed his hand on the armrest. The air changed. Every light dimmed. But not from shadow, from focus. The room wasn't darker. It was just looking at them. The wall behind the throne cracked, and a shape emerged. Not a person, not a god. A figure of names. Carved from everything spoken too many times. It didn't move. But the room leaned toward it. Like gravity had remembered what loyalty felt like. Era gripped her blade. Whispered to herself, "Not this time," and the blade whispered back, "By warming." Not from flame, from recognition. The same way an old enemy learns your footsteps before you strike. The boy turned to them, eyes wide, voice steady. "It's listening." Floki asked, "To what?" The boy answered, "To what we haven't dared to say." And the throne pulsed once, like a mouth preparing to speak, through them. The throne didn't speak, but it hummed. Low, endless, like the sound a mountain makes when no one is listening. And the closer the boy stood to it, the louder it became. Not in volume, in presence. Floki circled the room once, then again. He dragged his hand along the walls. They were warm, not soft. Like something once rigid had begun to remember being alive. He turned back to the throne. "I've seen this before," he said. Era asked where. He smiled. "Every time I close my eyes." The boy stepped forward, one hand raised. Not to touch, to ask, but the throne didn't respond with words. Instead, the ash on the floor lifted, spiraled, shifted, and formed a shape. Ragnar. Standing, still, eyes closed, then cracked like brittle bone, and fell to dust. Era flinched. "Why show him?" the boy whispered. "Because it doesn't want him. It wants what follows him." Floki tilted his head. "And what's that?" The boy looked up. "Everything that survives him." Above ground, Ragnar stood at the edge of the crack. He felt it again. That pressure behind his ribs, the weight of something remembering him. Athelstan approached. "There's no more rope." "I know," Ragnar said. "Then what do we do?" Ragnar didn't answer. He just stared at the ground, like it was learning how to breathe with his lungs. Inside, the throne pulsed again. This time, the roots moved, not much, just enough. They slid across the floor, slow, like fingers stretching after long sleep. They reached Floki first, brushed his feet, he didn't move. Then Era. Then the boy. The roots didn't bind, didn't grab. They recognized. From the ceiling came a single sound, a drop, not water, not stone, voice. A single syllable that none of them heard the same way. Era heard again. Floki heard belong, the boy heard return. They didn't speak. Because the room had asked a question and was waiting to see what silence meant. Then, the throne opened. Not like a mouth, like a wound remembering pain. Its center split. Inside, nothing. No seat, no crown, no bones, just light. A single beam. It rose from the floor to the ceiling and stopped at the boy's chest. He stepped forward, didn't hesitate. He didn't enter. He didn't speak. He simply stood inside it. The beam held, not burned. It wrapped him in quiet, and the roots retracted. Every symbol on the walls dimmed, and Floki, watching it all, said softly, "Has the key," Era whispered. "To what?" Floki replied. "To whatever doesn't want to stay locked anymore, and far above." At the edge of the forest, the sky changed. Not color, memory. The sun dimmed. not with clouds, but with decision. And across the trees, the birds fled, all of them, at once, as if some old signal had been heard again, after too many winters of forgetting. The light didn't blind him, it held him. The boy stood within it still, breathing, silent, and the chamber responded like a lung. Walls drew in, not closing listening. Floki took a step back, not out of fear, out of instinct. The kind of instinct that tells animals when an avalanche is thinking of falling. Ira kept her sword drawn, though even she wasn't sure who the threat was anymore. The light shifted. Not in shape, in memory. It flickered like a thought being interrupted. And the room changed. The throne retracted, became the floor. The floor became symbols. Symbols became motion. And the boy. The boy remained at the center, still human, still visible, but no longer entirely his. Floki whispered, Hez speaking. Ira shook her head. No. Hez translating. Above, the wind had changed direction, not hard, just sure. It circled the village once, passed over the fire pit, curled through the forge, then gathered at the mouth of the crack, like breath preparing to enter the body of something sleeping. Ragnar knelt beside the edge. He placed both hands flat on the soil, closed his eyes, and in the black behind his lids, he saw the boy, not standing, but floating, suspended above a throne made of names, and behind him, a shape too large to be one thing. A shape made of everything the land had forgotten. Athelstan stood nearby, watching him. He didn't interrupt. He just placed one hand on Ragnar's shoulder and whispered a single word, hold. Below, the symbols on the wall lifted, risen from stone like steam from blood. They drifted into the light, one by one, and as they entered, the chamber began to speak. Not in words, in echoes. They felt it first in their ribs, then their spines, then their thoughts, every name they had forgotten, every face they had buried, every word they had chosen never to say, came back, and it all whispered, we are not what comes, we are what is owed. Ira stepped forward. Then take it from me, she said. The light didn't dim, but the room tilted, not the walls, the truth. Her sword warmed again, then hissed, and the blade cracked like language under too much pressure. She dropped it. Watched it burn, not to ash, but to script, a new symbol. Now written in her palm, Floki fell to his knees, laughed once, then screamed. Not from pain, from remembering. Something deep, something before thought. He clawed at his face, and beneath the grime, beneath the scar, a mark glowed. Not fresh, old. A mark that had waited to be seen. And it pulsed in time with the boy. The boy opened his mouth, no sound came. But his shadow grew longer, stretched across the chamber floor, across the walls, up the ceiling, until it became another shape. Another figure, one made of dark but edged in light. The figure did not move. But it echoed, the same as the first chamber, the same as the trees above. It stood there like a rule, like something ancient had found its own reflection again, and decided not to blink. The boy whispered, not to them, to it, and for a breathless second, every sound in the world stopped, even memory, even guilt, even flame. Then, the figure took a step forward, toward him, toward them, toward the surface. It took only one step, but the sound reached everything. The trees outside bent not from wind, but recognition. The river darkened, ash stirred in fire pits long dead, and in the hearts of those above, something shifted. Not broke, not screamed, just turned slightly, as if to face something that had always been behind them. The figure had no face, but it had form, cloaked in something older than cloth woven from silence. As it moved, the throne disappeared, melted into the floor like it had never stood, like it had only ever been a suggestion. Floki reached for the wall, not to steady himself, to mark it, to leave proof that they had been here, even if the world decided otherwise. But the wall didn't let him. It rippled and whispered back, you were here before. He pulled his hand away. It was wet, Not with water, with remembrance. Era stepped between the boy and the figure. Her sword was gone. Her symbol burned faintly in her palm. She didn't raise her hand. She just spoke. "Are you what we called?" The figure didn't answer, but her symbol pulsed once, then dimmed. As if whatever was inside her had already answered on its own. The boy looked up. He wasn't trembling, but he wasn't still either. Like the body had decided to stay, but the soul wasn't sure it wanted to. He said softly, "It doesn't come from beneath." Floki asked, "Then where?" The boy turned to him, eyes wide. "It comes from remembering what we buried in ourselves." Above, Ragnar staggered. Not from pain, from echo. He dropped to one knee, hand to chest. Athelstan caught him. "What do you see?" Ragnar's eyes were glass. "I'm not seeing. I'm being seen." The wind spun once, then stopped. The trees stopped moving. The air became still. Too still. Like even breath had been asked to wait. And then, the voice came. Not from the figure, not from the boy. From the space around them. It didn't speak words. It spoke dead. It said, "You dug into us, now we dig into you." Floki fell, hands to ears. Ira gritted her teeth, blood from her nose, the boy still standing. Eyes closed, smiling, not joy, permission. The walls peeled. Not broke. They peeled back like bark from an old tree. And behind them, rooms, more, hundreds, each one pulsing, breathing, occupied. Figures stood in each, wrapped in silence. Facing the same direction, toward the surface, toward the village. "Toward return," the boy whispered. "They're not coming to conquer, they're coming to remember." Era said, "What does that mean?" He looked at her. Soft, honest. "It means they were us, and they want us back." The figure turned now, away from the boy, toward the upward tunnel. No motion in its limbs, only intent. The first foot lifted, placed itself on the floor. Stone rippled. Symbols flared, and every other figure in every other room took a single synchronized breath, one, loud, final, as if the whole world had been holding it, since the beginning of the first name ever spoken. And now they were ready to exhale. They moved. Every figure behind every peeled wall. No orders, no drum, just motion. Like a memory rising together in every body still tethered to the world. And above them, the ground began to tighten, not crack, not open, just prepare, as if it too had lungs, and they were filling. Floki stumbled to the edge of the nearest chamber, pressed both palms against the stone. It pulsed once, then whispered through his skin. "You walked across our mouths." He pulled back, breath ragged. Era caught him. They both turned to the boy. He was smiling again, but this time, he was crying. "Why tears?" Era asked. "Because it remembers what we tried to forget." Above, the sun flickered, only once, but enough for Athelstan to drop his staff. He stared up. No clouds, no wind. And yet, he turned to Ragnar. Something just stood up on the inside of the sky. Ragnar didn't blink. He whispered, "Then we've run out of time." The ground pulsed again, now audibly, a sound like roots straining under stone, like grief chewing its way through the bedrock. People stepped out from their homes, not called, drawn. Children stood still, sensing something their parents couldn't name. Old men wept without knowing why, and the goats began walking quietly to the hill, as if to get one last look at the village before it wasn't one anymore. Below, the boy raised one hand, the light swirled around his palm. A perfect spiral, a perfect silence. Then he said, "It's not a war, it's a reunion." Floki whispered, "I'd rather die than be part of their family." The boy looked at him, softly. "You already are." The figures passed by them. None spoke, none looked, but their presence bent the air. Each one brought a piece of the forgotten. A scream, a secret, a hunger left too long in the dark. Ira saw one pass her. It wore her face, but younger and smiling, and bleeding. "What happens when they reach the top?" she asked. The boy didn't answer, because now he was glowing, faint, gold, like a candle inside a chest. Not flame, something before flame. He lifted his feet off the stone and hovered just inches. But enough to make gravity nervous. Floki stared. "You're not staying." The boy's voice was softer now. No echo, no. "I was only meant to remind it how to wake. And now?" "Now it walks without needing a name." Ragnar felt it too. Up on the hill, something old had risen. Not in defiance, in recognition. He knelt, drove his hand into the dirt, closed his eyes, and whispered to the thing below, "I never buried you, but I am still sorry." The ground didn't respond, but it allowed him to speak, and that, too, was a kind of mercy. The first figure breached the surface just after dusk. No crack, no explosion. The earth just opened, and from it, a body of ash and silence. It stood, turned its face to the wind, and inhaled. A full breath, the kind taken by someone who has not spoken for centuries, but has never once forgotten the sound of their own name. The first figure didn't move like a man, it moved like a story. Retold too many times, each version heavier than the last. Its feet didn't sink into the soil. The ground lifted to meet it. Not reverence, not submission, recognition. Ragnar stepped forward alone. The villagers didn't follow, didn't stop him either, because they knew. What was happening wasn't his fault, but it was his burden. He stood just a few feet away, and still the figure felt far. Not in distance, in origin, like it hadn't traveled from below. But from before, he said nothing. But the wind around him whispered his name 3 times, first with warmth, then with ash, then with salt. The figure tilted its head, as if it finally heard what it had been searching for, and whispered back. We left so we could be missed. More figures emerged, all silent, all rising from soil that opened like remorse. They didn't march, they returned. One by one they walked past the villagers, never touching, never asking, just existing, and with each step, a name returned to the minds of those who had forgotten them. A brother, a mother, a name from a burial stone too weathered to read. Athelstan knelt beside the chapel ruins. He traced symbols into the dirt. Not Latin, not Norse. The language of grief. A syntax of memory meant not to summon but to release, he said softly. Not all who return are meant to stay. Below, the boy still floated. His body dim now, his breath slower. He whispered, "They're not angry." Ira asked, "Then what are they?" He replied, "Ready." Floki climbed up behind them, eyes rimmed with tears, though he was laughing. "They'll wear our faces until we remember how we felt inside them." He looked around, at the walls, at the light, at himself. "We were never first," he said, "and maybe that's the point." The chamber pulsed again, but it didn't open more. It withdrew, as if its purpose had been fulfilled. The throne no longer existed. The light faded. Only the spiral on the boy's chest remained, still, glowing, and then it cracked just once. A hairline fracture, and from within a sound not scream, not music. Apology. Back above, the village felt full, not of people, not of noise, of presence. The returning ones didn't speak. They stood near homes beside trees, in corners where memories once hid. And the villagers, some wept, some fled. Some walked straight into the arms of shapes that looked like old love. No violence, only reminder. Ragnar sat beside the old well. He placed one hand on the stone, felt warmth. Then coolness, then warmth again. He looked at the horizon and saw more figures coming, not from the crack, from everywhere else. From trees, from riverbeds, from the sky when no one was watching. They were not summoned. They were echoing like the world had finally responded to the silence. It was buried under. The boy's voice returned one last time, whispered through the roots. We were never gone. You were simply too loud to hear us. The sky did not fall. The world did not crack, but something fundamental had tilted, not visibly. Not loudly, just enough for everyone to feel it in the soles of their feet. as if the planet itself had blinked and now looked at them differently. The returning ones did not speak, but they stood where pain once lived, near doorways, beside broken fences, in fields where bones still waited to be named. And in that standing, they asked nothing but remembered everything. Era stood in front of one. It looked like her mother. Not exactly, not completely, but enough to unthread years of steel she had woven around her own grief. She did not cry, she simply nodded, and the figure nodded back. Nothing more. Because in some languages, acknowledgement is louder than apology. Floki spent the night painting their shadows, not their bodies, their absence. What they didn't take up, the negative space they left behind. As if memory had a weight and he could trap it with ink. Athelstan sat beside the old tree and listened, not to the wind, to the ground. He hummed softly, matching a rhythm he didn't remember learning, then said, "We built too much on top of too little, and the tree dropped one leaf. Only one, and it did not touch the earth when it fell. It floated then vanished." Ragnar spent the night awake, by the fire, by the edge of the village, watching the line where living became remembered. He whispered, "Are you here to judge us?" The figure across from him said nothing, but a stone rolled at his feet. Old, worn, etched with one rune. Enough. The boy did not return to the surface, but his voice did. In the dreams of every child, he was there. Sitting beside streams, laughing beside stone markers, teaching the names of birds that hadn't flown for generations. He said the same thing to each of them. "Tell them I was never the first to wake." By dawn, the returning ones had stopped moving. They stood, as still as statues, as still as grief with no words left. And then, they began to fade. Not vanish, fade. As if they had finally remembered who they were supposed to be. And now, they were leaving it behind, one by one. Not in pain, not in sorrow, just complete. Some crumbled to ash, some shimmered and dissolved. Some walked backward into fog that hadn't been there before. And with each departure, the village grew lighter, not freer, just more true. When it was over, Ragnar walked through the square. Floki leaned against the fence, chalk dust on his face. Ira stood sharpening a knife she didn't plan to use again. Athelstan lit a small candle, not to honor the dead, but to remind the living that their names were safe again. No feast was held. No story shouted, but someone carved a new symbol on the gatepost. Two hands open, palm to palm, a spiral between them. Below it, one word still. The village did not celebrate, but it breathed. For the first time in what felt like generations, no one flinched at the sound of wind. No one looked over their shoulder at the trees, and no one asked what day it was, because time had paused, not broken. Just loosened, like a belt unbuckled after a long, silent fast. Ragnar walked through the field, the one where the bones had once hummed beneath the wheat. Now, the earth was quiet. He knelt, pressed a palm flat. It felt cool, still. Not empty, just settled. He whispered, "You can keep what you took." And the dirt didn't argue. Era built a small shrine, not out of stone or blood. Out of things that remained. A cracked mirror, a blade with no edge, a drawing of a door with no handle. A cup filled with silence. She placed it near the forge, lit no fire, just sat beside it and whispered to no one, "I'm not sorry I lived through it. I'm only sorry I don't know how to tell it." Floki began laughing again. But only at night. Only when the goats made sounds that weren't words, but almost. He would walk to them, place a finger to his lips and say, "Shh, not yet. Let the sky forget a little longer." Athelstan gathered the children. He didn't teach them verses. He didn't preach. He asked them to draw. What they remembered, what they dreamed, what they didn't understand. One child drew a tree with hands instead of branches. Another drew a mouth that whispered its own name backward. And one boy drew nothing, just a spiral, perfect, balanced. And when Athelstan asked what it was, the child said him. The well was clean again, not by effort. It simply stopped spitting ash. The water returned, tasted like stone and old memory. No one questioned it. But they did drink slowly, like the water had stories too. And they weren't ready for all of them at once. The goats returned to the hill, this time without guidance. They stood in formation, watched the valley, then turned, and all walked down together, as if something had told them nothing's waiting anymore, but it still watches. That evening, Ragnar stood outside the longhouse. The stars were bright, brighter than any night before, not in number, in sharpness. They didn't flicker, they stared. He said nothing, but someone beside him did. Athelstan's voice soft, "They're not watching us. They're watching to see if we forget again." Ragnar nodded. "Then let's give them something to remember." A fire was lit, one, low. At the center of the village, no dancing, no feast. Just people, sitting, telling stories. Not of what happened, but of what changed. How the wind now circled differently, how the tools no longer rusted overnight. How the sky no longer turned red at the mention of certain names. And how the boy, the one with no name, no parents, no shadow, was still gone. But not absent, because every time someone closed their eyes too long, they saw him, by the tree, by the throne, by the mirror that still waited below. Smiling, not haunting, just still. The shrine Era built began to change, not visibly, not loudly, but the items within it, the dull blade, the door drawing, the cracked mirror, started to feel alive, not pulsing, not breathing, just watching. Like they'd become symbols of something that hadn't finished speaking. Floki was the first to notice. He passed by late one night, torch in hand, and the mirror, though cracked, caught no reflection. None. Not his face, not the flame, not the stars, only darkness. Swirling gently, like water in a dream. He leaned closer and whispered, "Are you back?" And in the mirror, the darkness bent, not shifted, bent toward him. He didn't tell the others. Not right away, because some truths are heaviest before they're shared. In the days that followed, the village grew quiet again. Not dead, just cautious, like breath held between heartbeats. The goats refused to go near the crack. Children walked in pairs, even when gathering herbs. And the well, though clean, sometimes echoed louder than it should. Once, Ragnar dropped a stone into it and counted. 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then a sound came back, but it wasn't the splash. It was a whisper, his name. Said backward. Athelstan returned to the tree, the one where the spiral leaf had vanished. He carved nothing, prayed nothing, just sat. Because some places don't require action, only presence. And presence, after what they'd lived through, was enough. Era sharpened a new blade. She didn't need it. But ritual brought shape to silence. She tested it against air, then against shadow. It hummed. Once, then quieted. She whispered, "You'll know what to do if it happens again," and set it beside her bed. Not under her pillow, beside, in plain view. Because now, they faced things open-eyed. One night, a girl disappeared, just for an hour. Found standing in the square, eyes closed, palms dirty. When asked where she'd gone, she said, "I was called." No one scolded her, no one questioned. They simply marked the place where her feet had been with a stone, and moved on, because they understood. It wasn't about where she'd gone, it was about what knew her name enough to ask. Ragnar returned to the crack. He stared into it. Nothing moved, nothing glowed. But it no longer felt like a wound. Now, it felt like a mouth that had spoken once and might again. He placed a hand on the edge and whispered, "If you return, bring something worth the silence you left." Later that night, Floki finally told them about the mirror. They gathered around it. The flame showed in it now, but not the people. Just fire and fog behind it, Ragnar said. "It's not showing us," Era replied. "No, it's showing where they are," Athelstan whispered. "Then it's not a mirror." And the boy's voice echoed softly in all their minds. "Not from the shrine, from below. It's a window, and it's still open. It wasn't the mirror's crack that troubled them. It was the stillness. It didn't change, didn't fade, didn't grow. It just stayed, a frozen ripple in glass, shaped like a memory trying not to return. Floki set a candle in front of it, not to illuminate, to test. If flame still flickered in its presence. Maybe it hadn't swallowed all the light, but the candle burned low, steady, unmoving, even when wind touched his face. The flame did not dance. He whispered, "You're waiting." The mirror did not respond, but the flame went out, without smoke. Ragnar didn't approach the shrine. He watched from a distance, every day. He said nothing, asked nothing, but his silence grew sharper. The way trees hold tension before a storm. Era began keeping watch, not for attack, for return. She sat near the forge, blade across her knees, and listened. To the well, to the birds, to the moments between wind gusts, when even silence seemed afraid to speak first. Athelstan walked the village line, each morning, each dusk. He carried a piece of chalk now, and every time he passed a stone, he marked it, a circle, a line through it. Some kind of boundary he hadn't explained. When Floki asked him what it meant, he replied, "It's not to keep anything out." Floki raised a brow, to remind us where we end. Children began to speak softer. They played, yes. Laughed even. But their eyes shifted more often to the tree line, to the hill, to the sky, not with fear, with curiosity. Like something there was beginning to whisper their names in dreams. One child, small, bright-eyed, stood outside the shrine at dusk. She stared into the mirror for almost an hour. When her mother found her and asked what she saw, the girl said, "It blinked, and nothing more." That night, the earth shifted again. Not a quake. A rearrangement. Soft, subtle. Rocks once buried appeared beside wells. Roots twisted through walls and spirals no one had planted. And behind the forge, a second crack opened. Thin, quiet, no glow. Just an invitation made of absence. Ragnar was the first to find it. He knelt beside it, placed his hand just above the gap, not touching, but feeling, in the air, it pulled toward it. "Like breath from a mouth before it speaks," he said. "You're not done." And the wind replied, "Neither are you." Floki came in the morning, looked at the second crack, then at the mirror, then back again. "I think it's a loop," Era asked. "A trap?" Floki shook his head. "A question." She frowned. "What kind?" Floki smiled. "The kind we've already answered, but didn't know we were being asked." Later, they sat together in the square. Ragnar, Era, Athelstan, Floki. No crowd, just firelight. Each one staring into it, not thinking, remembering what they had done, what they had become, what might still be looking at them through every reflection left unguarded. Athelstan said, "We close nothing." Ragnar nodded. "We just paused it." Era tightened her grip on her cup. "Then let's not sleep too long." The second crack didn't widen, it listened. Like a breath drawn before a name you're afraid to speak. And at night, when no one walked near it, the wind changed its rhythm, not louder, not colder, just aware, as if it passed by the crack slower, out of respect or fear. Ragnar placed stones around it, not to block it, to mark it. Circles, tight, precise. He didn't tell the others what they meant, but everyone understood. This wasn't a new wound. It was an old eye opening again. Floki brought ink. He painted on the stones, not runes, not warnings. Questions. Simple shapes meant only for those who could no longer read them. And when the wind blew, the shapes hummed, not every night. Only when someone nearby whispered the word remember. Era began mapping the routes, all of them, across homes, beneath walls, around fire pits. She traced them in ash and chalk, and soon realized they weren't growing, they were converging toward the crack, like nerves returning to a central spine. She stood above it one evening, arms crossed, and said, "Whatever's coming back, it's building a mouth." Athelstan watched the mirror. It still showed no faces, only fog and flame. And sometimes, a shadow behind the flame. It never moved. It just watched. And once, for half a heartbeat, it looked like Ragnar. Children stopped sleeping alone, not because of nightmares, because of echoes. Soft voices in their ears just before sleep, not threatening, but personal. They said things only lost family could know, secrets whispered to rocks, names of animals long dead, and when asked what they heard, they said, "It was someone trying not to forget us." One child drew a picture. It showed the village, but upside down, trees rooted in the sky, wells spilling stars, homes that walked. Floki stared at it for a long time, then folded it neatly and said, "Maybe we live on the ceiling of something else." That night, something returned. Not a person, not a monster, a voice. It came from the well, then from the cracks, then from the trees. Gravel thick, not angry, just waiting to be heard again. It said, "We were the skin, you were the burn. Now let the scar speak." The villagers gathered, not called, not ordered. They simply stood, torches in hand. Breath held, even the goats were silent, and in that stillness, Ragnar stepped forward, to the second crack. He knelt, pressed his hand flat against it, and whispered, "We didn't bury you. We buried the memory of burying you." The ground trembled, soft, once, and the stone circle surrounding the crack shifted outward. Not broken, just opened, like an answer forming from an old unfinished prayer. The stones didn't fall, they simply shifted outward, as if they had been pretending to be solid this whole time, and now remembered they were once a door. The crack widened, not violently, not hungrily, but with purpose. And from within it came a hum, soft, layered, familiar. It wasn't song, it wasn't threat, it was recognition. Ragnar stepped back, but not far. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't signal the others. He just watched. The way you watch the sea return to a beach you thought had forgotten it. Floki arrived with no torch. He didn't need one. The stones gave off their own glow now. A pale, golden shimmer that came from below. He crouched, whispered, "Are you building a body or a memory?" And the answered with a pulse. Not in his ears, in his teeth. Era joined moments later. Her boots stopped inches from the crack. She looked down, then said, "It's speaking in our weight now." Ragnar raised a brow. She explained, "When I move, the soil listens. When I stop, it thinks. I can feel it deciding whether or not to answer." Floki nodded. "It already has. It just doesn't use words anymore." Athelstan arrived last. He didn't speak at all. He simply knelt beside the nearest stone and began tracing the ash lines that marked the old route maps. Only now, they weren't route paths, they were veins leading into the crack and pulsing, as if the entire village had become a face. And this was where its voice finally gathered enough strength to open. The villagers came again, silent, barefoot. Some holding hands, none afraid, not anymore. They stood in rows behind Ragnar, behind Floki, behind Ira and Athelstan, watching and then listening. Because the hum grew louder, deeper, like something just behind the earth's surface had cleared its throat. The mirror at the shrine cracked a second time, clean, precise. And instead of fog, a mouth appeared, not one made of flesh, one made of stone dust and flicker light. It didn't open, it didn't need to, because everyone saw the same thing inside it, their own names. Forgotten and spoken at once. The boy's voice returned, from the mirror, from the crack, from inside every breath taken in that moment. He said, "You remembered enough to be asked again," and with those words, a shape rose from the crack. Not a man, not a beast, a structure made of carved silence, layered with the texture of things left unsaid for too long. It had no eyes, but it saw. It had no hands, but it held the moment. It hovered, inches from the earth, then lowered and touched the soil, not with weight, with acknowledgement, like a king bowing to the ones who had once ruled by forgetting. Floki stepped forward, asked the only question that mattered, "What now?" And the shape replied, not with sound, but with shape. The spiral returned, carved into the soil, burning cold, and beneath it, a single word bloomed into every mind at once. Begin. No one moved when the shape spoke, because it didn't speak. It shifted, its body a lattice of bone light and cracked stone, quivered once. And that movement echoed through the villagers' bones, like a forgotten command they'd once obeyed without question, not out of fear. Out of design, Ragnar stood first. He looked down at the spiral burned into the earth. It pulsed with a cold glow. Not a warning, an invitation. He said nothing. He simply stepped toward it. When his foot crossed the edge, he didn't vanish. He was reflected, twice. Once above him hovering, once below shimmering like oil on water. He stood still. The spiral expanded, and then, as if it had only been waiting for his balance, it stabilized. Floki whispered. It didn't want him to lead. It wanted him to remember where he was standing. Era asked. And where's that? Athelstan answered. Between what came before and what comes next. The villagers formed a ring. Unspoken, unplanned, a natural orbit around a memory. None of them had ever spoken aloud. The shape at the center hovered higher, its underside opened, not as a mouth. As a door, no hinges, no steps, just a slow, rolling fold of space, and behind it, darkness, but not empty, not void. It was the kind of darkness that watches the inside of eyelids, while dreams are being written. One of the children stepped forward, the one who had drawn the inverted village. He walked straight to the spiral and placed his hand on Ragnar's. Ragnar didn't flinch, because he had already seen this in the mirror, and so had the boy. Together they took one step forward, then another, toward the shape. Toward the open. No words, no goodbyes, only silence that knew this wasn't loss. This was function, a clock ticking into a deeper hour. Floki turned to the crowd, and for the first time in many moons, he didn't smile. He said, "We were never meant to build on forgetting. Now we build on knowing." He looked to Athelstan. "You ready to teach again?" Athelstan nodded slowly. Yes, but we'll need a new alphabet. Ira drew her blade, not in warning, in ritual. She bent low and carved a spiral into the doorway of the forge. Then she whispered, "If it finds us again, let it know we remembered how to stand." The shape still hovering began to dissolve, not upward, not downward, inward, like it had delivered the question. And the answers were now walking themselves into place. When it vanished, the spiral remained, etched deeper, brighter, permanent. No one touched it. No one dared, because they all understood now. Begin wasn't an order, it was a seed. The spiral never faded. It didn't dim in the rain, didn't shift in the wind. Didn't wear with footsteps, it remained, etched into the center of the village. Like the pupil of a giant eye, one that had opened once and might open again. But for now, it watched from within. No one stepped on it. Not from fear, from understanding. Some things you walk around, not because they threaten you, but because they finished speaking. And you're still listening. Ragnar returned to the forge. He didn't speak much anymore. He simply observed. Watched how the sky no longer flickered. How shadows now curved toward the center of the village. How the well, once echoing, now hummed like it was hiding laughter. Floki took to carving again, but this time he didn't use symbols. He carved faces, not of gods, not of villagers, but of things he saw now in dreams. A bird with no beak that screamed in color. A woman whose shadow lagged 3 steps behind. A mouth in a tree trunk that only opened when no one looked. When Era asked if they were threats, he smiled. No, they're reminders. The children resumed their games, but their rules had changed. One game, called Still Root, involved standing in the center of the field and seeing who could stay silent the longest. Without the wind calling their name, no one ever won. Because the wind now knew every child by memory. And memory has no patience for winners. Athelstan built a library, not with books, with walls. Every wall bore a story. Scratched, burned, painted, not written in any single language. but every villager could read them, because truth doesn't care about grammar. Only echo. One evening, a new voice returned from below, not the boys. Not a stranger's. It sounded like the soil itself had grown vocal cords. It whispered through the trees, through the forge smoke, through the breath between sleeping couples. And it said, "You may not have asked for this, but you did not turn away." That night, the spiral pulsed. Once. Just once. Enough for every goat to lift its head. Enough for the stars to blink. Enough for one stone near the well to crack. Not apart. Open. And inside it, a seed. Smooth. Pale, but pulsing with the same rhythm as the spiral. Ragnar lifted it in silence. He didn't ask what it meant. He just planted it. Right beside the forge. Era watched him. Athelstan joined them. Floki followed. They said nothing. Because sometimes, a seed is louder than a speech. Days passed, then weeks. The seed never grew, not visibly, but the roots spread. You could see them in the way the crows stopped flying east, in the way the mist refused to settle near the spiral, in the way babies now cried in perfect rhythm. No one questioned it. They simply adapted, because adaptation is not fear. It's a form of devotion. The seed never broke the surface, but it changed the soil. Where once roots tangled and twisted, now they aligned, straight, deliberate, as if organized by memory, not instinct. Floki sat beside it often. He didn't talk to it. He played songs with his fingertips against stone. Low rhythms tapped in patterns no one had taught him. Once a child asked why. He replied, "Because if it's listening, it'd rather it dance than wake angry." Era brought water to it every morning, even though it needed none. She poured carefully without expectation, a silent offering. Then pressed 2 fingers to the soil and whispered the same 3 words. Still, below. Ours. No one asked what it meant, not even Ragnar. Because they all felt it too. The quiet pressure just beneath the skin of the village. Like a second heart pulsing underground. Ragnar spent his days walking. Not in circles, not in lines, in spirals. Out from the seed, past the well. To the hill. Back again. He marked nothing, said nothing. But when he walked, the birds followed. And when he stopped, they stopped. Because even the air knew now. Some footsteps leave echoes too heavy to silence. Athelstan returned to the chapel ruins. He built nothing. He simply sat in the grass where the altar had once stood. And he listened. The wind there had a different tone. Less whisper, more memory. He began to hum again. A low tune. One he hadn't sung since the crack opened. Each note felt like it cost a year of sleep. But each one returned something too. Strength, weight, stillness. Then on the 30th day after the seed's planting, it spoke, not loudly. Not with words. It pulsed. Once, twice, then again. Each beat spread outward through the ground, and upward through breath. And with each wave, the spiral at the center of the village grew clearer. No longer just a symbol, now. A map. Floki saw it first. He stood on the forge roof, watching smoke bend toward the center. And there, etched faintly into the dirt between homes and hearts, lines, interwoven, branching like veins, or root systems, or constellations. He climbed down slowly, touched the dirt, and whispered, "We are being taught how to build without forgetting." That night, Ragnar brought the villagers to the spiral, one by one, not to speak, to listen. He stood at the center, hands open, eyes closed, and said, "If we begin again, let us begin beneath. If we remember again, let us do so without apology. No cheers, no chants, only silence." And then, a third spiral bloomed beside the first, not carved, not painted, grown from the roots of the seed, as if it had finally finished its thought, and wanted them to see what it remembered. The second spiral glowed only at night, a pale green light, gentle as moss under moonlight, but deeper than any fire. It didn't shine. It invited, like a hand extended from darkness. Not to pull you in, but to remind you that you were already there. Children began sleeping closer to it, not touching, just near. They said it helped them dream less of mirrors, and more of rivers they hadn't seen, but somehow missed. Ira stood guard the first night it appeared. She didn't sleep, didn't blink. She leaned on her new blade and watched, and as dawn broke, she whispered, "It's not guarding us, it's watching who we choose to become." Floki etched runes in a wide ring around it, but not runes of protection, runes of permission. He called them openings. When asked what that meant, he answered a prayer made sideways. Athelstan began writing again, but this time he used soot and cloth. Long ribbons of memory hung from trees, marked with verses no god had taught him. When the wind caught them, they twisted slowly like they were trying to show their backs. No one read the backs. Some truths are only meant to be faced once. The seed's pulse slowed, but its reach spread, not just through the roots, through language. People began finishing each other's sentences, dreaming each other's fears. A mother knew her daughter was afraid before she cried. A father hummed the song his son had never learned aloud. No one found it strange. They had built a home. In the echo now. One day, the goats refused to enter the village. They stopped at the tree line, stood silent, and all turned their heads at once, toward the western ridge. Ragnar saw it first, a figure, not walking, drifting. Its shape shimmered like memory under heat, not light, not form, just presence. Ira reached for her blade. Athelstan placed a hand on her wrist, not fear. He said, "Not yet." The figure approached. Closer. It stopped just short of the spiral, didn't step in, didn't speak. But every villager heard it all the same, a word made from weight, soon. Then it bowed, not deeply, but with intent, and vanished. No shimmer, just no gone, smoke. Like it had been carved from a question that no longer needed asking. That night, the spiral shifted again. Its curves tightened, its lines deepened. And from the second spiral, a root cracked open, inside it. A stone, no larger than a tooth, smooth, black, carved with the same symbol. Floki had once scratched into the forge, wall in a moment of dream-drunken instinct. A mouth, a line, a circle. Ragnar lifted it, and felt its weight in his chest before his hand. He turned to the others, held it out, and said, "It's not a warning, it's a key." The stone weighed almost nothing, but Ragnar's hand trembled when he held it. Not from strain, not from fear, from recognition, as if his bones knew this shape, as if his blood had been waiting for it, longer than he'd been alive. Floki stepped close. He didn't reach for it, didn't ask to hold it. He only stared, then whispered it was never lost. It was waiting for us to remember where we left it. Ragnar nodded, and placed it on the ground beside the spiral, not within, beside. Because doors don't always sit in front of walls, sometimes. They wait beneath your feet. Athelstan ran his fingers over the symbol carved into the stone. It pulsed once, not with light, with meaning. A wave of memory passed through him, too fast to see, too old to name. But when it ended, he wept and said, "It remembers me." The air thickened. That night, not humid, not heavy, full. As if the village had become a container, and something vast was being poured into it. People spoke less, listened more. Even the trees leaned in, and the well. Once silent again, but this time, it spoke in answers. One woman dropped a question into its depths. "Will he come home?" The echo came back. Already did. Another man whispered, "Why do I remember things I never lived?" The water replied, "Because the world has run out of strangers. By morning, the stone had cracked open, clean, quiet, inside. Not light, not fire. A string, thin, silver, unmoving. It didn't stretch, didn't coil. It simply hovered and hummed, not in sound, in touch. When Ragnar reached for it, it looped around his finger and stayed. Not binding, trusting. Era leaned closer, asked, "What's it connected to?" No one answered, but everyone turned toward the spiral. Because they already knew. Floki brought a bowl of ink to the stone, held it above the string, and let a single drop fall. The ink spread along the line, like blood returning to a sleeping vein. And for a moment, the entire spiral glowed, then dimmed. But the line remained, visible now, stretching outward from the center, into the distance. Past the hill, beyond the trees, towards something they hadn't seen since the world shuddered. Athelstan traced its direction. West, he said. Ragnar nodded. No, further. That night, no one slept. Not because of fear, because of readiness. Because for the first time in a long while, they weren't waiting for something to come from below. They were preparing to follow it. The string didn't point west. Not really, it pointed toward a memory. A place where names had once gathered like embers. Quiet, but not cold. And even though no one had spoken of it in years, everyone remembered. They called it Hollow Ridge, not because it was empty, but because when the wind blew through its trees, it carried the sound of breath that didn't belong to animals or wind. Breath that felt like it was watching itself. The villagers gathered supplies, not weapons, not maps, offerings, ribbons, bones, charcoal, bread. Anything that once held warmth. Because they weren't going to fight. They were going to answer. Ragnar carried the stone. Still split, still warm. The string now wrapped twice around his hand. It pulsed with each step. Not pulling, just reminding. He didn't speak. Because he didn't want to disturb the rhythm of the approach. Eira walked beside him, her new blade strapped to her back, unused, but awake. She glanced at Ragnar and said, "You know this won't be a reunion." He nodded. "No, it will be a translation." Floki took up the rear. He painted spirals on tree trunks as they passed. Some glowed, some flaked, but each one felt like a handprint on the shoulder of a friend. "You hadn't met yet," Athelstan hummed. The same tune he'd once heard in the ruins. Now it felt different, like he was humming with something not for it. And when he stopped, the wind continued the melody, only slightly out of tune. Like a child learning to sing, from a parent who never spoke. They reached Hollow Ridge by dusk. The trees leaned like they were listening to the soil. The grass had grown in spirals, and the rocks were warm to the touch. Floki knelt beside one, carved into its face. A mouth, no teeth, no tongue. Just a shape wide enough to swallow a story whole. He whispered, "We've come," and the stone replied, "So did we." The string snapped loose from Ragnar's hand. It didn't fall. It hovered, then dropped to the earth, where it burrowed into the grass. Like a worm made of memory. A small tremor followed, and then the spiral bloomed again. Right there in the moss, only this one was inverted. The curve began at the outer edge and spun inward, as if this time, the answer was coming to them. Ragnar stepped into it, and the spiral sang. No sound, just vibration, and from it rose a figure, not flesh, not spirit. A shape made of reflection. It mirrored Ragnar, but not entirely. Its face was older, its hands scarless, its eyes forgotten, but not gone. The figure spoke, not aloud, inside them. "You've brought the key." Ragnar raised the stone, and the spiral below him caught fire, without heat, without smoke, only illumination, and the shape said, "Then you may now enter the name you have not yet earned." The shape didn't demand the name, it offered it. As if names weren't something you owned, but something you borrowed, from the space between memory and silence. Ragnar stepped forward. The spiral at his feet continued to glow. Its fire wasn't fire. Its light had no shadow. It didn't burn. It clarified. And as it reached his ankles, his breath changed. Not quicker. Not heavier, just deeper. Like each inhale remembered more than lungs were supposed to hold. Eira whispered from the edge. "If he steps wrong, will it take him?" Athelstan shook his head. "No, it's not a trap. It's a mirror with rules." Floki grinned softly. "Then let's hope he likes his reflection." The figure spoke again. Its voice felt like the weight of blankets soaked in rain. Familiar, warm, but impossible to shake off quickly. "Speak only the part of your name that has not harmed." leave behind what cracked the breath of others. Ragnar lowered the stone. Its broken halves pulsed. Once, then fused. No heat, no flash. Just the gentle pop of tension letting go. He held it in both hands now, looked into it, and for the first time in his life, he saw nothing, no history. No title, no scars, only presence, and it terrified him more than any blade. Because it meant he had not yet been claimed by himself. He knelt, placed the stone in the center of the spiral, and said, "I am not here to be restored, I am here to be returned." The spiral dimmed. The air shifted, and from behind the figure came a sound. Not a song. Not a word. A breath taken after 1,000 winters. And then a second shape rose, this one smaller, less defined. It shimmered as if it had only recently remembered. It was allowed to be seen. It stepped beside Ragnar, placed its hand on his chest, and spoke in a voice only he could hear. "Do not name yourself. Let the earth do it first." He nodded, closed his eyes, and waited. Nothing came for a long time, no wind, no whisper, just quiet. And then the soil beneath the spiral cracked, not deep. Just enough, and from it, a flower grew, one single stem, black petals, veins of gold. It did not open. It simply was, and from the flower's center came a whisper, spoken in every direction at once. "Rothvar." Ira gasped. Athelstan dropped to his knees. Floki grinned, not from surprise, from relief. He whispered, "Finally," the name the mirror forgot. Ragnar Rothvar opened his eyes. No change, no transformation. But the weight behind him, the years he'd never agreed to carry, was gone. He stood taller, not prouder, just aligned, and said, quietly, "Then let that be the name I bury last." The name lingered in the soil. Rothvar. It didn't echo. It settled, like a final snowflake landing on stone. The kind that signals winter has stopped arriving and started becoming. Ragnar didn't speak again, not because there was nothing to say. Because the name had filled all the spaces where doubt used to live. His silence now was no longer defense, it was design. The figure who had given the name stepped back, not into shadow, into absence, like it had only existed for the naming. And now that the shape had remembered itself, it was no longer necessary. Its final whisper floated behind it like smoke. This time, hold it differently. And then, gone. The villagers stood quiet. No applause, no tears, only breath, one shared inhale. Like they were trying to become part of what had just occurred, not witnesses. Woven. Air approached first, she didn't speak either. She touched Ragnar's shoulder, nodded, then turned to face the spiral. It no longer glowed, but it vibrated faintly under her feet. Like laughter remembered after a long illness. She placed her blade down on its edge, not as a gift, as a promise, one she hadn't yet written, but would. Floki circled the spot 3 times, each lap slower than the last. He didn't draw, didn't carve, he just watched. And finally whispered, "Let no one try to own what chooses to stay still." Then walked away, with his eyes closed the whole time. Athelstan sat in the grass beside the black flower, the one that had grown from the crack. He didn't touch it, he sang to it, soft. Half words, half remembered, not hymns, not doctrine. Just the sound of being grateful and unsure at the same time. The flower bent slightly, once, not from wind, from listening. That night, no one lit fires, but everyone sat in circles, some near homes, some in fields, some beneath trees that had not bloomed in 2 seasons. And all of them, they whispered names, not of the dead, not of the living, but of the parts of themselves they had long stopped calling out. One man whispered, "Kind," a woman whispered. "Brave," a child whispered, "Whole," and above them, the stars did not shimmer. They held, perfect and still, like punctuation after a sentence that took 4 generations to finish. Rothvar watched it all, from the ridge, alone, at peace, not because the danger had passed, but because something old had turned its face toward them again. and smiled. The next morning brought no mist, no birdsong, no dew, just light. Sharp and level, as if the sky had agreed not to filter anything anymore. Not even truth. Rothvar walked through the village, not to inspect, not to lead, to feel. His boots sank softly into dirt that had once shivered under his name. Now it cradled it. Every home he passed had a new symbol etched beside the door, not identical, but all spiraled. Each one had grown slightly overnight, as if the wood had decided it needed to participate in remembering too. Athelstan stood beside the well. He whispered something to it. The water rippled in response, a low tone like agreement. He turned to Rothvar and said, "It doesn't echo anymore, it answers." Rothvar nodded and lowered a stone into it, not to test, to return it. The same stone that once cracked when the mirror saw too much. Now it vanished beneath the surface. No splash, no sound, only peace. Floki spent the morning atop the forge roof. He painted nothing, just stared westward. He'd begun carrying a mirror in his sleeve. Not to look at himself, to check if the sky remembered how it used to look. So far, it hadn't blinked, but it had tilted, slightly. Enough to suggest that something large was now breathing behind it. The black flower beside the spiral had doubled, now 2 stems, still closed. Still glowing faintly at dusk. Era tied a thread between them, red, thin, and whispered, "As long as this holds, we are not repeating, we are revealing." No one questioned what she meant. They simply added their own threads over the next days. By the 7th, it looked like a web woven by kindness itself. A net meant not to trap, but to remind you not to fall too far alone. Children began to gather stories. Not old ones, not legends, moments. One girl carved the sound of her sister's laugh into wood. Another boy mapped every cloud he'd seen that month. One child placed their handprint in wet soil and told their mother, "That way the ground knows who I am when I'm asleep." At night, no flames were needed, because the spiral glowed again, now golden. Soft, enough to read by, enough to remember by, and once, it flared, only once, just long enough for everyone to see what hovered above it. A third flower, smaller than the rest, not black, white with red veins. And at its center, a spiral of its own, one that spun slowly. Even when no wind stirred, Athelstan whispered, "Something new is growing from what we dared to end." Rothvar watched, then stepped away, and left his boots at the edge of the field, barefoot now. Because the soil no longer needed protecting from him, and he no longer feared what it might carry upward. The white flower didn't open. It pulsed, rhythmically, steadily, like a quiet drum, not of war but of continuance. Each night it glowed faintly, and each night the spiral around it responded. Tiny grains of soil lifted, hovered, spun, just for a moment, as if the ground was breathing upward. Rothvar sat beside it each morning. Barefoot, unarmed, unasked, he whispered to it not in words but in thoughts. Regret, memory, promise. Sometimes it shimmered, sometimes it grew warmer, sometimes it remained still. He never forced it. Because not all answers come in the shape we expect. Some arrive as pauses that wait for us to speak first. Athelstan traced the roots again, now wider, now deeper. They stretched beyond the ridge, into old hunting trails, toward caves they no longer entered, and he found something strange. A second pulse, fainter, farther, but identical in rhythm. Another spiral? Or something trying to remember how to become one. Floki called it the twin. He drew it in dust, then erased it immediately. "Not yet," he said. We haven't earned a mirror that far away. Children no longer feared the dark. They explored it, sat at the edge of the woods, closed their eyes, and tried to feel the names of things they hadn't met yet. One child returned and told Era, "I saw a creature made of roots and fire. It told me it once held your name." Era didn't flinch. She simply whispered. "Then I hope it held it well." The well changed again. This time it didn't speak. It reflected, perfectly, not just faces, intentions. A man stared into it and saw the lie. He hadn't spoken yet. A woman wept at the kindness she'd been afraid to give. It did not judge. It simply showed. And that somehow made it feel even more sacred. And more dangerous. One day, Rothvar placed a single hand on the third flower. The white one. It did not bloom, but his hand glowed, briefly, like it had absorbed something old. When he pulled away, a thin line of red ran down his palm. Not blood, not ink, script. A spiral made of characters no one had ever written. But everyone somehow understood. Era read it aloud. And as she did, the spiral on the ground pulsed once more, a fourth time, and said, "We are ready to speak what has not yet been born." That night, the wind carried laughter, not from people, not from trees. From somewhere in between, it echoed between houses, between shadows, between silences, and for the first time in years, the village sang back. The fourth pulse changed everything. It didn't shake the ground, didn't tear open the sky. It simply made everything quieter, not silent. Quieter, like the world had just asked, "Are you listening?" And the answer was yes. Rothvar's palm still glowed. The spiral tattoo shimmered beneath the skin, like embers in winter ash. He didn't hide it. He let the children trace it with their fingers. Each one saw something different, a gate, a tongue. A road that curved into itself, a name no mouth had yet formed. Ira stood beside the forge and stared west. She didn't speak, not for days. Until finally she said, "There's something there now. Not coming toward us, but waiting to be found," Floki whispered. "What if it's waiting for a question?" She smiled slightly. "Then it'll like what I'm bringing." Athelstan began drawing again. But now his sketches weren't symbols or lines. They were maps of breath, patterns of how people inhaled when they were afraid, exhaled when they remembered joy. He said, "If we learn the rhythm of our own survival, we'll stop fearing the things that hum like us." No one questioned him, because even the walls of the longhouse had begun to exhale. Gently, rhythmically, like they were tired of being homes and wanted to become listeners again. A child began speaking to the third flower each evening, just before dusk. She brought it small stones, painted bones. One time, a feather still wet from a crow's wing. She never asked for anything. She just shared. And one morning the flower was gone. No wilt. No stem, only a faint indentation in the earth. And a spiral pressed gently into the dirt. That night, the wind called her name once, just once. But it was enough for her to whisper back, "I know." Then the sky cracked, not with light, with presence. For a heartbeat, every star aligned. And at their center, a shape, not a god, not a ship. A spiral, so distant it should not have been visible. So certain it could not have been ignored. And from the center of that spiral, a flicker, a question made of fire. "Will you speak us into being?" Rothvar stood beneath it, hand raised. Tattoo pulsing. He didn't answer aloud. He just closed his eyes. And when he opened them, the sky blinked, the spiral dimmed, and above the village, a new sound began, a heartbeat made of voices, soft. Low, familiar, and entirely new. The heartbeat in the sky did not fade. It settled, like a drum once used for war, now beating only for memory, and each pulse matched the one under the soil, the one in the walls, the one in Rothvar's palm. The village had become a chamber, and the world was listening through it. The children woke before dawn, not called, not shaken. They simply stood, eyes wide open, as if a thought had passed through all of them at once. They walked, barefoot and quiet, to the spiral, and sat. Nothing was said. Because the spiral was not there to hear them. It was there to witness. Ira sharpened no blades that morning. She boiled water. Not for food. Not for healing. But to steam the old wood of the longhouse. To let the memory of the forest seep out of the grain again. She whispered to it, "You held us once. We can hold you now." And the walls creaked back. Not from weakness, from agreement. Athelstan read aloud, Not scripture, not law, a single phrase. If we are made of breath, then let us exhale something worthy. He repeated it again and again, until even the stones felt quieter. Floki painted a final spiral, this one on the roof of the forge. It faced the sky, made of soot, ash, and pressed berries. He didn't climb down. He lay flat beside it and whispered, "If you land here, bring only questions. We're done pretending we have answers." That afternoon, the sky pulsed again, but softer, not with urgency, with invitation. Rothvar stood in the square. The tattoo on his palm glowed. Then, a voice, not his, from everywhere, and it said, "Then begin." No one moved, not out of fear, out of awe. Because when something ancient asks you to begin, you don't rush. You breathe, and Rothvar did. One breath in, one out, then he stepped forward. Onto the spiral, and spoke. "We are not what we survived. We are what we chose not to bury." A light rose from the ground, not flame, not star, a shape, a door made of memory and moss, a threshold with no hinges. And from beyond it, a world that had been listening to them all along, waiting, not judging, and now welcoming. The light shaped like a door didn't ask for sacrifice, it asked for presence. A being to step through it, with eyes open, with breath steady, with nothing in their hands but everything they remembered. Rothvar didn't rush. He stood at the edge of the spiral and waited. Until his shadow curved perfectly to match its rhythm. Only then did he speak. "If this is a path, then let it be walked without armor." He stepped forward. The spiral accepted his weight. The door shimmered, not in warning, in recognition. And it opened, not outward, not inward, downward. What lay beyond was not another world. It was this world beneath its skin. A version made of echoes and choices not taken. A version built from the voices buried beneath each generation's silence. He walked, the light followed him, but no one else stepped in, not yet. Because this journey, this initiation, was his alone. Floki placed his hand on the ground beside the spiral. He didn't cry. He just whispered, "Let the road know it was chosen, not fallen into." Ira knelt. She placed her blade beside the flower stems. She unstrapped the second dagger from her thigh, kissed its hilt, and whispered, "We are not done guarding. We're just choosing what to protect differently now." Athelstan stood silent for a long while. Then he opened his book, the one with no ink. He pressed it flat against the dirt. The soil absorbed it slowly, page by page, as if reading it back to the earth that first wrote it. The children formed a ring, not rehearsed, not commanded, a perfect spiral. Wide enough to encircle the ridge. They didn't chant, they breathed in rhythm, and their breath. It echoed into the door, like a tether, like a promise. "We will follow when it's time, but we'll carry light instead of torches." Inside the door, Rothvar walked. He passed through roots made of names, walls that pulsed with decisions, a sky that wasn't above, but around. And ahead of him, a figure, not waiting, walking too, but slower, as if it wanted to be caught. He moved toward it, closer, until he saw his own face, but younger, and the younger version spoke. "We never failed, we just weren't done yet." And then the path leveled out. The light dimmed. He stood in a field made of stillness, and the spiral beneath his feet, the final one, glowed once, and from it, a voice not God, not ancestor, but origin. "We swallowed you once, but you climbed back up with our name in your mouth. Now speak it into the wind, so it no longer needs to be remembered." Rothvar stood in the field of stillness. No trees, no sky, no wind, but not empty. The stillness had shape. It pressed gently against his skin, as if air itself wanted to hear him, before it let him through. He exhaled once. The spiral at his feet brightened. Soft gold. A sun buried inside dirt. The voice returned. "Speak." But Rothvar didn't say his name. Not yet. He reached down and touched the spiral. Its warmth spread up his arm, down his spine, into his breath. He thought of his mother's hands, of a blade that had never struck true, of the first goat he buried alone, of the boy he once was watching the sea, and wondering what the water had forgotten. And then, he whispered, "I do not speak to be heard. I speak because silence cannot hold me anymore." The spiral pulsed. The wind returned, but it came from within him. A breeze rising from the bones, and with it, a song, not of melody, of truth, a thread of sound that stretched through the ridges, the wells, the roots of the village, and into every breath the others took above ground. Athelstan felt it first. He gasped and dropped to his knees. Floki leaned against the forge, hand to his chest. Ira blinked as the flower threads began to flutter. Though no wind touched them, and the children, they laughed, not out of joy, out of recognition. One child whispered, "He did it." He said the part of the name the world didn't know it had. The sky opened. No light, just presence. A shimmer above the longhouse. A shape like folded glass moving through fog. It didn't descend. It observed, and then it nodded. And for the first time since the mirror cracked, the spiral at the center of the village spoke aloud. A voice made of layered whispers. He is returned, not as one, but as many. Below, Rothvar stepped forward again. The field rippled. 100 spirals now surrounded him, each one spinning slowly. He walked between them, and every step made a sound. Not footsteps, but laughter, argument, breath, prayer, human moments. Not grand ones, not heroic, real. And at the center of the spirals, a pool. Still, dark. He knelt beside it, saw his face, but younger, older, twisted. And from the reflection came a whisper, "Name us." He placed his palm into the water. The spiral on his skin pulsed, once, and released, vanished, into the pool. And when it did, the water began to rise. It took shape, became a book, floating, open. Unwritten, and the voice said, "You have learned how to carry what wasn't meant to be held. Now write only what you are willing to become." The book hovered, unwritten, weightless, and yet the space around it bent. As if possibility had become gravity, Rothvar stared. Not with fear, with reverence. Because blankness is never empty. It's the loudest kind of invitation. He reached forward. Not to write, to listen. His fingers hovered above the surface, and from the book came warmth, a pulse. Not his, but familiar. The same rhythm as the stone, the spiral, the soil after rain. A rhythm he'd been born with, but only now remembered. Athelstan felt it from above. He dropped his staff and stood still. Then whispered, "Has not writing history? Has writing permission?" Era turned toward the spiral. The white flower trembled. Its center glowed. A single drop of gold dripping upward. And when it reached the air, it froze mid-flight, hovering, unchanging, waiting. Floki laughed quietly. "Of course," he said. "No story ends with silence, it ends with sharing." Back below, Rothvar placed one finger against the page. It did not blacken, did not burn. Instead, the book inhaled. The page dipped gently beneath his touch, and from it, a line appeared. Only one, carved in shadow light. "Let the next breath be ours." The pool beneath him rippled once, and suddenly, he was no longer alone. Figures stood at the edges, not ghosts, not gods, echoes, shapes of every step he had not taken, every word he had almost spoken, every version of himself that had been left behind in favor of survival. They stared at him, not with judgment, with readiness. One stepped forward and said, "Then choose." Rothvar looked down. The book now held a second line, written by them. "Begin with what you fear to name." He nodded and said it, not aloud, not in thought, but through breath. The pool brightened, and the spirals began to spin, not faster, together. The echo versions of him smiled, then stepped back. One by one, they turned to smoke but left footprints that glowed faintly. Each step a sentence, each fate a chapter closed, until Rothvar stood alone again. And the book? Still open, still waiting, but now, with his voice printed across its spine. The book didn't close. It breathed. Each time Rothvar stepped away, its pages lifted slightly, like lungs beneath a thin cloth. It was no longer a tool, no longer a gift. It was a mirror that could read back. And what it showed now was him. Not the man he had become, not the child he had been, but the intention. Threading those two together. Back above, the sky changed, not color. Not shape, weight, it felt closer. Not oppressive, not ominous, just present. Like a parent leaning over a child's shoulder, not to correct, but to listen. The third flower bloomed, its petals unfolded slowly, revealing a center that glowed pale blue, and from it rose a thread, not silk, not root, voice. The thread hovered in the air and drifted toward the well, not with speed, with certainty. And when it reached the stone rim, the water below turned black, not with danger, but with ink. Ira reached into it. Her hand came out stained, not with regret. With story, a symbol now marked her forearm, one none of them recognized. When she asked Floki what it meant, he replied, "It's a sentence." "But we haven't learned the language yet," she nodded once. "Then he'll speak it anyway." Children began building small towers, out of twigs and stone. They didn't say why, they placed them around the spiral. 12 in total, one for each echo of the boy, who once carried the voice of the roots. Athelstan watched from a distance. He wept softly, not because of grief, because the boy's silence had been answered with legacy. Below, Rothvar returned to the book. It had changed again. More pages now, filled, but not with text, with maps, each one drawn in a spiral, not of places, of decisions, moments in time, when silence could have turned to violence, but didn't, where breath could have broken, but held. He placed a hand on the newest one and whispered, "We built nothing. We remembered how not to destroy." The spiral glowed once more. This time, it bled upward. Light twisted into the air and opened like a gate. And through it stepped something small. A creature, no larger than a wolf, fur woven with moss. Eyes like molten coal. It looked at Rothvar and spoke, not in words. In rhythm. "You called with silence. We answer with presence." He bowed, and it bowed back, then sat at his side, not as companion, as witness, because what came next would not be carried alone. Rothvar sat beside the creature of moss and coal. Neither spoke, neither moved, because the air between them, and the silence that wrapped it, had become a language. And sometimes, silence isn't a lack of sound. It's a gesture of readiness. The book no longer hovered. It had lowered to the soil, rooted by the echo of every thought Rothvar had shaped. It remained open, pages turning by wind that no one else could feel. Each flip revealed a new design, patterns like breath trails, like pulse maps across old bark, like names spoken without ever being written. One page fluttered longer than the rest, then tore itself free, lifted and floated toward the spiral. Up above, Floki saw the paper rise. He ran, not to stop it, to follow. He sprinted across the ridge, through the ash field, past the stones. The page reached the center spiral and sank down, vanishing into the earth, as if it had only ever been a memory returning home. Floki dropped to his knees, placed both palms on the spiral, and laughed. Not loud, not from joy, from relief, he whispered. "We don't carry the story anymore. It carries us." The moss creature stood. Its eyes pulsed once. Then it walked into the book. No movement of legs. Just shift, as if it belonged there, had always belonged there. Pages closed behind it, and from within the cover, a hum, low, steady. Rothvar pressed his palm to it. The spiral reappeared on his skin, only now. It had roots. Back above, Athelstan rang the bell. No one remembered putting it there. A small copper bell nailed to the elder tree. He struck it once. Its sound did not echo. Instead, it turned to mist mid-air and drifted across the village. Each time it touched someone, they paused, as if hearing their own name, spoken in a tone reserved for mourning. and invitation at once. Children carried feathers into the square. Black, gray, white. They stuck them upright into the spiral's edge. One child asked, "Will it fly now?" Another whispered, "No, it will finally land." Rothvar stepped into the page light again. This time he carried nothing. No blade, no stone, no burden, only presence. He walked past the spirals now blooming beneath his feet, past the roots curling toward him like fingers eager to remember touch. He reached the gate of silence again. It opened, and behind it, a field. Not of grass, of names, growing, soundless, endless. He fell to his knees and wept, not for sorrow, not for joy, for the permission to return as more than just one man. Rothvar stood in the field of names. Each blade of grass was etched with memory, not carved but grown. They shimmered faintly, as if the act of remembering had given them their color. And when he stepped forward, none bent or broke. They leaned toward him, toward his breath, as though the field itself was greeting someone it had been waiting for, since before waiting was even a word. Above ground, the air shifted. Not colder, not louder, deeper. The village held its breath, not in fear. In alignment. The wind no longer passed through, it circled. As if spiraling around the square, preparing something ancient to return differently. Floki stood on the ridge again. He held no brush. No ink, just his open palms facing the sky. The clouds overhead moved faster than the wind, their shape a spiral, their rhythm pulsing. He whispered, "If this is how the sky breathes, then let us learn to exhale through story." Athelstan knelt at the forge. He wasn't praying, he was listening to the stones, to the iron, to the memory of fire before it was taught to burn. And when he touched the anvil, it hummed, not a forge's song, a heartbeat. One not heard since the beginning of the first silence. Children slept with open hands, dreamed with open eyes. One by one, they began to speak words they hadn't learned. Not strange, just early. Words that didn't belong to language. They belonged to roots, to soil, to the pauses between stories that no elder dared explain. Rothvar walked through the field. With every step, a name rose, not shouted, not written, known. Names of those forgotten, not because they were unloved, but because time had no place to hold them, until now. He reached the center, where the grass stopped, where the names quieted, and there, in a ring of bare earth, stood a tree, small, bare, unmoving, but beneath it, 12 stones, each with a spiral, each pulsing faintly with a rhythm he had only felt in sleep. He knelt before the first, and it opened, like a book, but made of bark and breath. Inside it, a voice, his voice, from long ago, a version of himself he barely recognized, and it said, "You left me here when silence felt safer. Now I give you back what you buried." The second stone opened, a memory of grief, of a brother's last glance. But the pain was no longer sharp, it had become thread. Something to stitch with, not bleed from. He moved from stone to stone. Each one opened, each one returned something he thought he'd never want back. And by the 12th, he was weeping, not from sorrow, from weight being carried home. He stood. The tree at the center shimmered. A leaf appeared. Only one. It drifted down, landed on his shoulder, and whispered without sound, "You are now what the world can build upon." The single leaf on Rothvar's shoulder pulsed gently, not with light, not with color, with presence, like it had been waiting not to fall, but to be witnessed. It held no veins, no flaws, just a spiral etched at its center, smaller than a fingerprint, older than any map. And when Rothvar touched it, the ground beneath his feet shifted, not collapsed, shifted, as if the very earth was adjusting its memory to include him, correctly this time. Above ground, the sky bloomed, no longer clouded, no longer spiraled. It opened like a page, revealing stars that hadn't been seen in centuries. Because no one had earned their gaze, they blinked slowly, one by one. And from their rhythm, the wind changed direction. Now it sang. Floki painted again. But this time, he didn't know what the image would be. He let the brush guide him. Strokes like falling water, shapes like breath pressed into ice. And when he finished, he stepped back and saw, not a face, not a god, a gate. With no hinges, and a spiral made of leaves around it. He whispered, "We're not going forward, we're going through." Athelstan read aloud again, this time from a book no one had written, the blank one that once absorbed his silence. Now it whispered back, not in words, but in moments. He heard the breath of the forge, the laughter of a mother long gone, the name of a song he'd only ever hummed in dreams. And in the center of it all, a single phrase burned into the page. "You are now old enough to hold beginnings." He closed the book, pressed it to his chest, and finally slept. The children returned to the edge of the spiral. They carried feathers again, but this time they wove them together, a wreath, wide enough for the flower stems, light enough for the wind. When it was done, they placed it where the third flower had bloomed, and the ground opened, revealing nothing, just light. And from that light came a whisper, spoken by many mouths. This time we arrived together. Rothvar stood beneath the tree. The 12 stones were silent again, closed, still. But now, they pulsed beneath the soil. He didn't dig, he didn't kneel. He simply stood. A man remembered not because he led, but because he had listened. Long enough to let the silence finish its sentence. The spiral returned to his palm. Only now it curled inward, not to trap, to protect. And above him, the tree bloomed. 12 new leaves, each one shaped like a name. No one had spoken in generations. He reached up, touched one, and the leaf whispered, "Take us home." Rothvar cradled the leaf in both hands. It was warm, not from sunlight, but from recognition. Its weight was memory. Its texture reminder. He didn't speak. He only breathed. The spiral on his palm uncurled once more. Not outward, upward. A single thread of golden light lifted from his skin and touched the leaf. It pulsed once, then vanished, and the wind returned. This time, it did not circle. It carried. Above ground, something changed. The spiral in the village square split, not apart, open. A new path unrolled from its center, glowing faintly like embers beneath snow. It stretched north, wound past the stones, slid beneath the well, and ended beneath the elder tree. No one stepped onto it, they simply stared. Until one child knelt, touched the path, and whispered, "It's not a road. It's a return." Era stood in the longhouse doorway. She felt the heat in the floorboards. She knew what it meant. Somewhere beneath them, the fire that once forged war was now warming something else. Choice, invitation, continuance. She closed the door, not to seal them in, to mark a threshold. Floki painted spirals on the ground with his fingers now. No brush, no ink, just ash and rainwater. He didn't draw them perfectly. That was the point. He whispered as he worked, "A circle unbroken can't teach. Let the cracks show us where to look again." Each imperfection in the spiral became a new flower. Black, white, red. Each one faced a different direction. Like they were learning how to see for the first time. Athelstan woke from his sleep, with a single word in his mouth. Anchor. He repeated it slowly, then stood, and walked to the forge. Not to light it, to open the earth beneath it. He moved aside old stones, shifted timbers. And there beneath the ashes, a small hollow, perfect circle, dry. He placed his hands into it and whispered, "You can build here now." No one asked what he meant. Because the forge began to hum. Not with fire, with approval. Rothvar took one last step through the field of names. The tree faded behind him, not vanished, faded, like a page turned slowly, not torn. He held the leaf above his heart, and the book that once floated now hovered at his side. Open again, empty again, but not blank. Because now, it knew how to wait. He walked toward the spiral. The moss creature returned to meet him. Together, they stepped into the light, not to leave, to connect. As Rothvar's foot touched the threshold, The spiral flared. All across the village, wind chimes rang. Doors opened. Goats looked up and nodded, as if they too had been part of the story and were finally being named. Rothvar whispered, "Im not the first, Im the next." And the voice of the spiral, for the first time in all its lifetimes, laughed. Not loud, not long, but true. And from that joy came a single phrase etched across every stone and breath. Then begin again. The day ended without sunset. Not because the sun failed, but because the light stayed, soft, even present. As though the village had become the horizon itself. Rothvar sat at the center of the spiral, leaf buried, book closed. He no longer waited, he no longer led, he simply was. A living part of what had once been wound too tightly, to see itself clearly. Now unwound, the spiral didn't vanish. It rested, a shape no longer demanding attention, but always available for return. Above, Floki strung ribbons between trees, not to decorate, to remind. Each ribbon carried a word. Enough. Still. Listen. Again. Welcome. One ribbon had no word at all. Just a small hole in the center, so the wind could speak through it, in whatever language was needed that day. Era walked the outer edges, marking posts with ash. One post she kissed, another she left a coin beneath. At the third, she paused longest and whispered, "May no one enter this circle," thinking they are alone. Athelstan stood at the forge as the glow cooled into coal-colored light. He placed his book on the anvil. Its cover now bore no title, only a spiral, etched shallow, and beside it, his name, not written, grown, as if the book had finally accepted. He had something to say, it could not forget. Children planted stones. Not in rows, not in patterns. Each stone was placed where a secret had been kept too long. Once planted, the stones pulsed once, a soft flicker, as if sighing in relief that the burden they carried had been witnessed. One child planted hers beneath her bed. When asked why, she said, "Because I dream loud, and now it has somewhere to go." The goats climbed to the ridge again, but didn't stay. They looked back, then returned to the village, sat beside the spiral, and blinked slowly. Even they had learned. This wasn't pasture, it was passage. Rothvar rose, not as a symbol, not as a savior, but as someone who had finally stopped carrying everything alone. He walked the spiral one last time, each step gentle, grateful. "Done," he whispered. "The spiral sleeps now, but so do seeds." And from beneath the soil, a fifth flower bloomed, colorless, weightless, but perfectly still. Like an answer, no longer needing a question. That night, the wind was quiet. Not gone, just listening, and the stars spun slightly. Just enough for someone watching to ask, did it move? Yes, it all had. And still, the spiral remained, because not all stories close. Some stories rest until they are needed again.